So today's topic for our safety moment is fire safety, and it's probably a fairly appropriate topic for given the current environment that we're in right now. We've got a long-standing drought, especially in the southern portion of the state. We've had some weather conditions that have made it much more dangerous. Red flag conditions, high winds, high temperatures. That coupled with drought. Dry conditions with the vegetation has yielded a significant number of fires, and this fire season is starting fairly early, and so we can probably expect it to be a long, smoky summer, and hopefully without serious damage to people or property. But we're concerned about that. We threw this one on the calendar to do this presentation. And the last few days have really borne out that this is an important subject for us to be aware of. So today we hope that you'll increase your awareness a little bit about the realities of fire, where it can happen, how it can happen, how to do some prevention for fires, and how to be ready if a fire should suddenly occur. Yesterday I was at my house. And I looked out, and I live in a rural area, and I looked, and I saw smoke coming up at one of my neighbor's place. So I jumped in the vehicle to go see if I could lend a hand. The fire department was already there, so I didn't get involved. But it was a brush fire, and it got into one of my neighbor's sheds and caused some damage there. Just takes a second. As I was contemplating this subject, I went back back in my mind to my history of how fire has impacted myself over my lifetime, and there have been a number of situations where there have been some close calls or some actual loss from fire, and one of those stuck out in my mind, and that was when I was a child. We had on our farm a neighbor who also had a farm, and this guy, he was an older gentleman at the time. He's probably been dead for 15 or 20 years ago since he passed away. Great guy, but he loved to burn. He would burn ditch banks, and he'd burn fence lines, anything he could do to clean up weeds and make the place look a little bit better. If he could light a match, he was going to do it. And one time he started a fire, and it got away from him, and it came over onto our farm, our property. And in addition to burning up weeds, it burned up some of our irrigation equipment, burned up a motorcycle that we had out along a fence line, and anyway, caused a fairly significant amount of damage. And this guy, W.D. Johnson, came down to talk to my father about the damage and offer to compensate for the damage he caused. And this was a quote that stuck in my mind for a long time. He says, "I only lit one match," and it just seemed kind of ironic at the time. Well, I only lit one match, but that's how simple it is. And sometimes it doesn't even need to be a match. Sometimes it can be something even more simple than that can cause an event that will cause your life to spiral out of control. There's nothing to make you feel quite as powerless as having a fire going on in your home or some of your property there and not being able to handle that. So we want to look at how can we prevent this? How can we plan and be safe in using this tool? Because the reality is fire is an important tool that we use. Over the weekend, my wife used that tool to make some really, really good ribs. She lit up the smoker early yesterday morning, and it sat and smoked those ribs all day until about 6 o'clock, and until those ribs would fall off the bone. Well, not quite fall off the bone, but they were close, and it was a great meal. But we used this dangerous tool of fire to produce a great meal for us. So ask yourself on that. How did fire affect your weekend? It might have been a positive thing, like me. I got some ribs out of using fire. But there are many people around the state. There are tens of thousands of acres on fire around the state. Property that's damaged. And then we also think of the future. We've got the 4th of July, Independence Day this week. How will fire affect your 4th of July? Hopefully it'll be simply, well, we went to the fireworks and they were beautiful and it was great and we went home and there were no problems. But I'm afraid with the conditions that we have, these red flag conditions that we're expecting this week, that it might turn tragic for a lot of people. So today is a day to take some action to be prepared for our weekend. All right. So ask yourself, what do I do if fire happens around me? What actions do I need to take? Am I prepared? Do I run? Do I fight? What is it that I do? So let's go through and talk about sources of fire. Fire can happen from a number of different means. It's not just striking a match. We look at fire sources as external or internal. Looking through claims, over the last about 5 years, we've averaged nearly $1 million per year in fire losses. And that doesn't include the workers' comp injuries that are associated with people responding to fires that would add significantly to that. So this is not a small amount of loss. Sometimes those come in small fires where we have a couple of $1,000s worth of damage. Sometimes they're over $1 million. One of those is, as we look at external sources, one of those was an arson fire where we had a member structure that was lost at I believe about $1.2 million because somebody intentionally lit a wildfire that got into this structure. Sometimes those external sources might be fireworks. That's one major concern that we have this week, is we have thousands of people around the state that are really excited to celebrate Independence Day with some fireworks. And I've been known to shoot off a firework myself occasionally, and they're enjoyable. The problem is when we couple dry conditions, hot temperatures, and wind with fireworks and using those in bad areas, in inappropriate areas, we can have some fires. I didn't get the graphic on it, but I saw kind of a tongue-in-cheek graphic of the state of Utah, and it said where you shouldn't light fireworks this weekend. The entire state was red. And in reality, we should really be smart about how we do that. Wildland fires, many of us interface wild areas and could be impacted by wildfires coming into the area. In the last 20 years, we've had an infestation of cheatgrass across the state of Utah that has really changed fire conditions. This is a grass that grows early. I heard somebody calling it bomb grass recently because this material grows quickly early in the spring and then dries out and is just tinder. It will burn so quickly that it can sneak up on us, and so that's a major concern that we have. Then we have internal causes of sources of fire that might be the dumb things that we do, like lighting a candle and leaving it unattended, or maybe inappropriately using some electrical devices, or not doing a hot work permit for certain types of work that we're doing with a torch or a welder. And all of these things, improper use of flammable liquids, all of these things can be sources of fire. So let's just talk about the basics of fire. What does it take to make a fire? We go back to the fire triangle. It takes an ignition source or heat, oxygen, and fuel. We have to have those three things to cause a fire. If we can remove one of those items, we can kill the fire or prevent it from happening to start with. We've got some challenges though, one of which is oxygen is pretty tough to eliminate. We're standing in 20.9% oxygen. It's a really common element, and it's all around us, and so that's hard to handle. So we really want to focus a lot of our attention on those two other parts of the fire triangle, the fuel and the heat source or the ignition source. Let's talk about those individually then. Fuels are all around us, and they vary between flammable and combustible. The difference between those is really how easy they are to burn. Some fuels are more hazardous than others. This paper that I have on my desk is a combustible material, and it will fairly readily ignite. If I light a match, it will take off, but it's not nearly as bad as gasoline, where I could just be in the neighborhood and strike that match, and those vapors maybe could have traveled to my location and will burst into some serious flame. Well, let's talk about combustible or flammable materials. Gasoline or other flammables, they burn readily. They have, if they're a liquid, they have a low flash point. That means the temperature at which they will ignite. And so, obviously, some fuels are more dangerous than others. So, flammable liquids. Pay attention to these: gasoline, paint thinners, paints, aerosol cans, alcohols, acetone, all kinds of flammable liquids. And just remember, they should all be kept inside of a flammable storage cabinet, and we should keep the containers closed at all times. And if we lost the cap to that gas can, we need to get a new gas can or get a new cap. We can't store those open because that puts us at major risk for fire. Here's an interesting demonstration. They take a grease fire and dump water on it. This is something that could happen in our own kitchens. So understanding how these fuels react is an important thing. Don't put water on a grease fire. That's a pretty simple rule that is hard for a lot of people to remember when a bad thing happens in their kitchen. This is maybe today's the day. If you don't have a fire extinguisher in your home, stop off on the way home tonight and buy that fire extinguisher, put it in your kitchen, and have it available. Whether it's for the grease fire or for the fireworks that are going to happen this weekend, let's get prepared for those things. Combustibles don't burn as easily as flammable materials, but they're capable of catching fire. So paper, wood, cardboard, general trash, these are all combustible materials. Let's take a walk around our facilities and determine, do we have a combustible load that could contribute to a fire in our building? So look inside of your mechanical rooms where your water heater and heater system, your furnace, is in your building. There shouldn't be any combustibles stored in there. Get all of that material out of there. Look around our other material, look around our buildings. Don't have stacks of pallets or other debris that could be combustible near your building. And vegetation as well. Let's clear those things away. If you have propane tanks or other fuel tanks around your facility, get all the combustibles out, because if we have a fire start in those combustibles, then it can get to be a really bad fire or even a levee coming from those tanks. Speaking of that, if we have compressed gas cylinders, they can be extremely hazardous. So particularly fuel sources like propane gas or acetylene, these fuel gases can expand. If they're released inside of our building, they can pool in low-lying areas, and all we need is an ignition source to get a spark to those, and they can ignite our building or even explode. You think about propane gas; it's heavier than air. It will settle down into a low-lying area and concentrate until we get a spark in it. That was acetylene gas, by the way, in that picture. So as we look at these compressed gas cylinders, let's follow a few basic safety rules on those. Keep those restrained at all times. If we're not actively using the cylinder, put the cap back in place so we protect that valve. That's the weakest link in that cylinder, is the valve. And if it gets tipped over and hits that valve, it can rocket through the building, or it can release a flammable material and cause our building to catch on fire or blow up. Keep your fuels and oxidizers separate. So oxygen should not be stored with propane or acetylene or other flammable materials or even combustibles, keep that separate. They should be separated by at least 20 feet or a suitable firewall in between those things. Even that oxyacetylene torch kit, if that card is not actively in use, that means right now I'm using it today, they should be separated. So you should take that oxygen cylinder or the acetylene cylinder off of the cart and separate it by at least that 20 feet. Look at our inventories and ask ourselves, do I really need 15 acetylene bottles or propane cylinders out here when we only use 1 or 2 per year? If you can reduce that, let's do it. Let's minimize, get to the point of where we've got enough, but we're not going beyond that because it puts us at greater risk for fire. All right, that second material in the fire triangle is oxygen. Like I said, we're standing in 20.9% oxygen. There's a lot of it around us, but if we enrich that oxygen environment, it can even get worse. Let's take a look at. Here's a video showing just some material that, it's hard to get it to burn. It'll just char, but he's going to put it into a high oxygen environment in this bottle, and you can see it readily burns, catches on fire. So anywhere where I'm using oxygen, like oxyacetylene torch or medical oxygen, maybe in the fire and EMS world, we'll have cylinders with oxygen to help people that are having breathing difficulties. That material, if it penetrates, permeates our clothing or other combustible materials, all it takes is a spark, and it can make that stuff burn when it wouldn't normally readily burn. So be careful with oxygen. The heat source or the ignition source is a major area where we can focus on to prevent fires. So we ask, where do these heat sources come from? Well, there's sparks from welding, grinding. It could be an open flame. I light a match or a lighter, and I light a candle in the office. Don't do that. You should have a policy that says no open flames inside of our building unless they're in a designated area. We have a mechanical room where I've got a gas-fired heater. Okay, we can do that. Maybe I have a welding area that's designated and hardened so I don't have combustible materials there. Only do those types of tasks in appropriate approved areas. Look at your grinders and torches and welders and all of those things that have potential to cause a spark. But realize that ignition sources are really common everywhere we are, because static electricity can ignite materials, particularly like a flammable liquid. If I get flammable vapors there, a static spark from my hand reaching for the nozzle when I'm filling up my tank with gasoline can ignite the gasoline vapors coming out of my tank. So just on that note, how do I protect myself? Why does the gas station have a big sign there that says "Do not re-enter your vehicle once you start pumping gas"? And the reason is because of static electricity. When you slide your bottom across the car seat, it will develop a static electric charge. Some vehicles are worse than others. Some materials on the seat. I had a car at one time, and that thing, I hated it. It was an old Mazda 626. And that thing, every time I'd get out, it would shock me when I closed that door. So how do I keep from igniting my gasoline? Touch something metal before you grab the nozzle on the gas pump. Touch your car. Touch the hose away from the handle, and don't get in and out of your car while you're pumping gasoline. So fireworks, good time to talk about this, because many of us will be attending fireworks demonstrations this week, and some of you out there might be responsible for those in your communities. So we ask ourselves, when we do this, are we adequately protected? If you're bringing a contractor in, this is just kind of a risk management side of things. Ask ourselves, do we have a contract with them? Have they provided us a certificate of insurance showing that they're adequately covered and they're covering us as an organization? What if our employees are shooting off the fireworks? we need to ask ourselves the question, do we have certified shooters or pyrotechnicians? There's a program in the state through the state fire marshal's office where they will train shooters. Many of our organizations out there say, well, we just have the fire department do that. Just because you're a firefighter doesn't mean that you are qualified to shoot off fireworks. There's some training and experience that's necessary for that. And if you have some more questions about that, please give me a call, and I'm happy to help out and give you some direction there. So let's go through where some of the causes happen from. I call these dumb ways to burn your building down, and one of those is having candles or open flames inside of a building. Let's have a policy that says we don't have that kind of stuff. There are ways that we can have the good side of a scented candle without having the open flame. They have some non-flame candle heaters or other things that we can have the positive side of those smelly candles without the negative side. Space heaters, we don't worry about those much today, but give it a few months and we'll be digging those out. Let's inspect those before we use a space heater. Make sure that they're approved. Don't just bring one in from home. Make sure it has adequate grounding. That means the third prong, and it has tip-over protection, so it's not going to work. And most importantly, if you're not at your desk, that space heater needs to be turned off. And I would have a rule that says if we find your space heater running when you're not at your desk, that space heater goes away and you don't get to have it anymore. Let's be responsible with these heat sources that could burn our building down. We don't want the dumb ways of doing it. Smoking is also a regular cause of fires. So let's have a policy that tells people where it is appropriate and inappropriate to smoke and enforce that policy. Let's provide adequate facilities, whether that be ashtrays or whatever it may be, to collect those smoking materials so they don't get thrown in the flower bed that might have dried out by now, or throw it in the dry grass. Let's provide the facilities that help us to. Should people be responsible? Yeah, but let's give them an opportunity to be responsible. Let's also look at other things. What are our egress routes? Can we get out of here? Are our hydrants kept clear? In the event that there's a fire, can the fire department get there? And have we done our regular testing on those to make sure they work? Some of you may live on the wildland interface. You may have a lot of vegetation around your buildings that would make you at risk for wildfires. In those events, let's look, is there a way that we can go out and clear a fire break ahead of time? If we do it today before the fire is coming at us, it's much easier to do that. Can we make that a regular part of our process? Can we trim the vegetation away from our buildings so we reduce the risk that if a wildfire comes along that it actually gets to our building? So let's look at our property once again. Look at the vegetation around the buildings, propane tanks, protect those really critical areas. So hot work is another area. That means anything that's producing a spark, welding, cutting, grinding, those things. You should have a permit system in place. Anytime you do that kind of work on the facilities, you should be letting somebody know, whoever that responsible party is, by giving them a permit. Here's what I'm doing, and I will have extinguishing equipment in place, and I'm going to come back and check after it's done. Sometimes if we're welding on a building or cutting, that has to happen sometimes. But having a fire blanket, wetting down materials that, if you're up on the roof and there's some combustible materials that we can't clean up, you always want to clean up the leaves and things like that could burn, but maybe there's combustible material exposed. Cover that with a fire blanket or wet that material down. Let's minimize the chance that happens. Okay. All right. And have that fire watch. Flammable material storage. Any of those flammable liquids should be stored inside of a flammable storage cabinet. Aerosols as well should be inside that cabinet. As far as tanks, gas cans, those should be OSHA-approved safety cans. Just that regular red gas can that most of us have in our supplies at our homes are inappropriate for a workplace, and OSHA has this requirement that we have those OSHA safety cans. For transferring flammable materials, we should ground those containers, bond those together so we don't get static electricity discharges. Once again, aerosols can be really bad. Sometimes they're worse than a can of gasoline, because if they get exposed to a fire, they're under pressure and they can rocket around a room and explode and fill the room with a flammable aerosol that can cause you to lose your entire building. So look at your storage for those aerosols, and also look at your inventories. If I can eliminate a lot of that old junk aerosol stuff, let's get rid of it. If you're involved in a fire, if you see if a fire happens around you, you've got a decision to make. Can I fight this fire or not? So you ask yourself the question, do I have a safe exit? Does my policy allow it? Just because there's a fire extinguisher there doesn't mean that you're approved or capable of using that to put the fire out. So ask the question, can we do it? Because a lot of organizations will say, just evacuate, call 911, get out of the building. But if you're going to fight that fire, make sure you've got a safe exit. Make sure it's just getting started and it's not a structural fire. That means it's not burning any part of the building. It may just be a wastebasket fire or something like that, separate from the building. Because once it's got in the structure, your fire extinguisher isn't going to do any good, and you just need to get out. You can also use a fire extinguisher for escaping a burning building. Okay. Make sure you've got the correct equipment. Make sure you're confident in your success and your ability to get out. So just hit this briefly. PASS is the acronym we use for using a fire extinguisher, which stands for pull the pin. There's a safety pin in there that locks those valves, so we don't have those popping off, and we don't want that. Pull the pin out, aim at the base of the fire. That's where the fuel is. The flames are up above, but we want to hit the base. We're trying to exclude the oxygen from the fuel, and if I spray at the base, if I aim at the base, squeeze the handle and sweep side to side and cover that fuel, we can sometimes put the fire out. That fire extinguisher is not going to last nearly as long as you think it will. Make sure you use the right kind of extinguisher. Some things like this fire here is a magnesium fire. What happens when you put water on a magnesium fire? Well, it explodes and it gets a lot worse. Use the right fire extinguisher for the job. Most of us have ABC fire extinguishers, and they'll do a good job on most fires. But if I've got something odd, let's do some research on that. Okay? And you say, why is this picture on here? We're talking about all this fire stuff. Well, I'm dreaming about the Wind Rivers because I'm going to be up backpacking next week, and I have to think about fire safety when we're up there. And do we have approval to have a campfire while we were there? Actually, I just wanted to rub it in that I'm going to be backpacking in the Wind Rivers next week. Let's just summarize quickly. Let's evaluate our exposures. Let's look at what type of combustible, flammable materials, and let's take action today. Minimize the chance that fire is going to happen. Our potential for fires is much higher today than it was a month ago, and it's going to increase throughout the summer. So let's reduce our odds today by taking a few of these steps that we talked about. All right, any questions or comments? Danny says fishing's been good. Kokanee, great. Ooh, I like kokanee. That's a good fish for the state of Utah. If you have questions or comments, go ahead and type those in the chat or the Q&A box. While you're doing that, I want to run a poll really quickly just about our webinars in general. So I'll open this poll. And did that work? Yep, okay. I opened a poll. We periodically like to look at our training programs and say, how are we doing? What are there things that we could do better? One of the things that we wanted to ask was, what's the best time of day? What's the best day of the week of the year? What do you think about webinars? When would it be best for you to have this type of information given out? We love to record those, but we like to have you visit or attend our webinars live. So if you don't mind, please go ahead and answer these questions. First one, what is the best time for webinars? Some people might like really early in the morning. Some people might want later. What's the best day of the week? We arbitrarily said Monday is when we want to do those because that works for us. But if there's a day of the week that works a lot better for other people, we're pretty open to that. Is there a better week? We just arbitrarily said we'll do webinars the first week of the month. But if that's a really crazy week for the majority of our folks that view those webinars, we have no problem in addressing or in changing those things around. What about the pre-webinar banter? So we have a tendency to just get on and talk as we're preparing, but we do have the option of not going live until it's time for the webinar. Some people love it, some people hate it. We just want to know kind of where the majority of people stand on that. So it looks like we have about 40% who haven't started yet. Better than 50% finished. We'll just give that a couple more, a minute more there and see. Let's go back and look at the questions. I don't see any questions. Doug or Brent, you have anything to add while people are finishing up this poll?
No, it's very timely information, Jason, and that was a good job. Really appreciate that information. It's going to be helpful for me, I know for sure.
Thank you very much, Doug. All right, well, let's just summarize our poll here. Looks like 41% like 9 a.m. That's what I expected for the people who have signed up for 9 a.m. But that's what, and the people that signed up for the 7 a.m. like 7 a.m. Best day of the week? Actually, it looks like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We kind of have everybody likes it in the first part of the week. Okay. The week of the year looks like that's first, second, or third, kind of equally spread. What about the banter? One loves it, one hates it, the rest are whatever. All right. Thank you, folks. I really appreciate you taking time to do that. Appreciate you taking the time to support our webinars. We spend a significant amount of time putting these together and thinking and researching about the materials, and we want those to be valuable. We hope that helps you in not just having training, but making some good positive changes in your operations there. So in the long run, we reduce our losses, keep people safe and healthy. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Have an enjoyable Independence Day, 4th of July holiday, and have a safe day.